rain swept across a Manhattan street corner. Ethan Cole, a single dad and former engineer, pulled his truck to the curb. He stepped out, holding an umbrella over a woman, soaked and huddled on the sidewalk. "Do you need shelter?" he asked gently. She gave a faint, shivering nod. He returned with tea and a blanket. For 6 months, he brought her a meal every night. He grew used to her quiet smile. One cold evening, she grasped his hand, her eyes trembling. "Don't you recognize me, Ethan?" He paused, heart sinking. "Should I?" Her voice broke. "Ethan, I was your wife." Ethan Cole, 36, was defined by the ghost of his past. 3 years had passed since the accident, a catastrophic car crash that took his wife, Anna, and though her body was never recovered from the wreckage, the police declared her officially deceased. Ethan had retreated into his grief, a quiet, solitary fortress. He carried a heavy, undeserved burden of guilt, believing that if he had only insisted they leave 5 minutes earlier or taken a different route, Anna would still be here. His life now revolved entirely around his 8-year-old daughter, Lily. Lily was sharp, dynamic, and often asked the difficult question, "Where is Mom?" Ethan always offered a gentle, vague answer about heaven and angels, knowing the truth. The emptiness was too profound for a child. He had traded his high-pressure engineering career for a steady, low-key job at a suburban auto repair garage, seeking the kind of simple, repetitive routine that allowed him to be home every day by 5. He needed emotional stability, not career ambition. The routine was his armor against the chaotic reality of loss. One dark, rainy night, driving back from a late parts run, he saw her. A woman, Anna, perhaps 34, with short, matted hair, her eyes lost and distant, huddled beneath a broken bus shelter. She looked utterly exhausted, her fragile frame shaking with the cold. He felt an instantaneous, aching pull of compassion. He knew what profound, soul-deep loss looked like, and he recognized it in her tired posture. He instinctively connected her pain to the kind of suffering he imagined his own wife might have experienced had she survived, alone and injured. He stopped the truck, his window whirring down. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Do you need any help?" Her voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from the cold. "I just want quiet," she managed, avoiding eye contact. Ethan didn't push. He drove to the nearest coffee shop, bought a large scalding cup of herbal tea, ensuring the lid was tightly secured, and placed it on the ledge beside her. He also left a fresh, warm pastry. He never spoke again, simply leaving the items and backing slowly away. "I work the night shift near here," he said softly, pointing toward his battered vehicle. "I'm here every day between 5 and 6. If you need warmth, just tap on the truck. It's safer than the street." He stressed the word safe as a silent promise. From that night forward, a silent, unwritten ritual began. Every afternoon, without fail, Ethan would pull up, leave a fresh, warm meal, a hearty stew, a carefully wrapped sandwich, a piece of fruit, and a bottled water. He never asked her name. She never offered it. He only ever spoke a polite, "Good evening," or "Stay warm." He was performing an act of penance, a quiet tribute to the kindness he could no longer show his wife. Gradually, a change took place. Her haunted eyes began to hold a faint spark. She started smiling when his truck rounded the corner. It wasn't a wide smile, but a small, appreciative acknowledgement that touched his weary heart. "You look familiar," she commented one evening, her voice softer than before. Her hand instinctively hovered near the small, gold wedding band he still wore on his finger. "Maybe it's because I'm punctual," he joked, offering a small, sad smile. "No," she insisted, shaking her head. "A different kind of familiar, like a song I heard a long time ago, like I should know you intimately." He shrugged, dismissing the notion immediately. He couldn't afford to feel a connection. "I'm just someone who likes to help. That's all." He told himself he was helping a stranger, and nothing more. He was terrified of betraying Anna's memory. Poor, lost woman food every single day for 6 months. He never once touched her, or even asked her name. It was the most silently decent thing I've ever seen. Just a quiet act of devotion, done for a stranger. The owner noted how Ethan always made sure the meals were the kind of healthy home-cooked food a person needed to feel human again. Ethan didn't know that every time he walked away, the woman would run her fingers along the familiar lines of his truck, a deep, unsettling sense of recognition stirring within her. It was a memory without context, a heart beating in response to a melody it couldn't name. His presence was the only certainty in her amnesiac world. He was the one consistent anchor in a sea of nothingness. A few weeks later, Ethan arrived to find her sitting on the curb, absorbed in reading. It was a dog-eared copy of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, his late wife's favorite book. "I found it in your truck's toolbox," she admitted, holding it up. The last page has an inscription, "For Anna, always." Who was she? A heavy silence descended upon them, the noise of the city fading into a dull roar. Ethan took a slow, deep breath, adjusting the worn collar of his jacket. "She was my wife," he replied, his gaze distant, fixed on a memory he couldn't quite grasp. "She passed away 3 years ago." "I am so sorry," she whispered, her eyes filling with a genuine sorrow that surprised him. It was an empathetic, shared grief, far deeper than a polite apology. "It's all right," he said, forcing a quiet stability into his voice. "I've learned to live with the memory. Or maybe I've just learned to live around the void." She traced the name Anna with a trembling finger. "Did you love her very much?" "Enough to not love anyone else since," he confessed, the words sharp with finality. "Enough to still feel her presence in every empty room." She fell silent, looking out at the endless rush of the city. Then she asked a curious, theoretical question. "If she were still alive, what is the one thing you would tell her?" Ethan's eyes grew shadowed, reflecting the streetlights. He spoke the deepest truth of his grief. "I would tell her, I'm sorry I wasn't fast enough to hold her hand. I'd tell her I should have stopped her from leaving that night. I'd apologize for being alive when she wasn't." The woman's hand tightened on the book. She began to cry, silent tears slipping down her cheek. "Please," she said, her voice shaking. "I didn't mean to upset you." "You didn't," he insisted, though he knew she had touched a core of profound, unhealed pain. He felt closer to her in that moment than he had felt to anyone in years. Lately, she had been plagued by increasingly vivid dreams. They were no longer vague, they were visceral. She dreamt of the ocean's salt spray, the smell of burnt rubber and gasoline, the agonizing sound of grinding metal, and, most powerfully, the sound of a small, bright voice calling, "Mommy, look at the castle." The dreams were distressing and fragmented, leaving her exhausted. When she awoke, she would find herself instinctively tracing a small, neat surgical scar hidden behind her left ear, a mark she never understood. Unbeknownst to Ethan, every time he left her that week, she would find a spare piece of cardboard and, with a piece of charcoal, write the same 3 words repeatedly. "Lily, don't forget me." She had no idea who Lily was, but the name felt like an anchor she couldn't afford to lose, a plea whispered from her soul. One night, Lily asked Ethan the question that broke his heart. "Dad, why don't you smile when you talk about Mom anymore? It makes me sad that you only look sad when you think of her." He held his daughter close, smoothing her hair. "Because, sweetheart, I'm afraid that if I smile, your mother will forget me too, and I can't let her go." The next afternoon, Ethan found the woman shivering violently. Her skin was clammy and hot. She was clearly running a high fever. She was weak and barely conscious. Panicked, he placed her in the passenger seat of his truck, wrapped her in the blanket, and drove straight to the nearest public hospital. He stayed with her in the waiting room, ignoring the disapproving glances of other patients. When the nurse asked for her name, the woman could only shake her head, her eyes distant. I don't remember," she whispered. Ethan filled out the admission form, writing Jane Doe in the name field, using his own address and phone number as the emergency contact. A few minutes later, the ER doctor, a seasoned man named Dr. Hayes, emerged from the curtain bay, holding a clipboard, his brows furrowed in professional confusion. He waved Ethan over, his voice low and serious. "Mr. Cole," he said, "I need to ask you something vital. We found this scar." He pointed to the area behind her ear on a diagram and noted a rare blood type. The pattern of facial bruising is also consistent with a high-impact motor vehicle accident. Are you absolutely certain you don't know this woman's identity or anything about her past? I'm just a good Samaritan, Ethan said, defensive. I've been helping her on the street. I swear, I have no idea who she is. The doctor adjusted his glasses, looking closely at Ethan's face, noting the profound sadness in his eyes. We ran an emergency blood panel and cross-referenced it with local and state missing persons reports using the medical data and the facial reconstruction data we've gathered. Her blood type and a rare antigen marker match the dental records of a woman reported missing 3 years ago. The report states the body was never found. Her name was Anna Cole. Do you see the anomaly? Ethan stopped breathing. The clipboard swam into a blurry focus. The name Cole pulsed like a physical shock, a violent jolt back to the past. He didn't hear the rest of the doctor's words. His heart didn't just stop, it seized entirely. He backed away, his knuckles white as he grasped the edge of a nearby counter, his hands shaking so violently they nearly drew blood. It was impossible. His Anna was dead. This was a cruel, astronomical coincidence. A young nurse recalled, I've never seen a man look so utterly shattered by a name. He physically recoiled, grabbing the counter so hard I thought he'd break it. It was like his entire world, the solid ground of his grief, had dissolved in a single moment. He just kept repeating, it can't be. Ethan stumbled back toward the examination room, his feet moving on their own volition, his mind racing through 3 years of memories and 6 months of ritual. He pulled back the curtain, his gaze fixed on the frail woman lying on the thin hospital bed. Her eyes, still feverish, tracked his every move, confusion and a faint recognition warring in their depths. You're back, she murmured, a weak smile touching her lips. I thought you'd left. I thought you would stop coming. Anna? He choked out. The name tasted like ash and hope combined. It was an accusation and a prayer. She tilted her head, confused. Do you know my name? How do you know my name? Ethan sank onto the edge of the bed, his body trembling with the weight of 3 years' worth of loss and denial. I am your husband, he whispered, tears suddenly streaming down his face, blurring his vision. You are my wife. You are Anna Cole. Her eyes widened, a sudden, agonizing panic replacing the calm. She tried to pull her hand away. Wife? No. No, that can't be true. I don't remember a husband. I don't remember anything before the street. She looked down at her empty ring finger, then back at him. He fumbled in his wallet, pulling out a faded, creased family photograph taken years ago on a sunny beach day. A picture of a smiling couple and a 5-year-old Lily. He placed it in her hands, his own shaking too violently to hold it steady. She stared at the image. Her fingers, thin and fragile, traced the outline of the woman's face, her own face full of sun and laughter. Then she looked at the little girl. Tears began to fall, real, ragged tears of recognition. I remember this laughter, she gasped, clutching the photo to her chest. I feel this joy, but I cannot place it. She struggled to explain her past 3 years, the words coming in painful, disjointed fragments. After the accident, she explained, she had been thrown clear of the main wreckage. A long-haul truck driver, who feared police involvement due to his own expired license, had found her on the roadside, barely alive. He had dropped her off hundreds of miles away, near a major city hospital in New Jersey, where she was treated for severe head trauma and the resulting amnesia. She remembered the driver's face, but nothing of her own. The distinctive surgical scar behind her ear was the only physical evidence of her ordeal. Since her discharge, without an identity, she had wandered, unable to recall her name, her family, or her life, drifting between temporary shelters in the streets until she found her way to Manhattan. I have been alive, she whispered, her voice thick with self-pity and sorrow. I was lost, and you have been helping me for months, believing I was a total stranger. She laughed, a broken, hysterical sound. The irony is cruel. Ethan pulled her close, his embrace careful, yet desperate. trying to convey 3 years of missing her into one moment. You were alive, he corrected her, holding her face between his hands, making her look at him. And I didn't know for 3 years. 3 years of you out there, alone, and I drove by you every day. Why didn't you recognize me? She asked, her voice raw. You were so different, Anna. The hair, the clothes, the fear in your eyes. But the kindness, I recognize the kindness in your smile, he insisted. Perhaps, he said, holding her tighter, perhaps that is why I always found you. Maybe it's because I always knew that if there was a chance, I would still find you. But the return of memory was incomplete. The past was still a jigsaw puzzle with critical pieces missing. When Lily, excited and confused, was brought in by Ethan's mother-in-law, Anna looked at the child with profound, heartbreaking love. My love, Anna said to Ethan, her voice choked with sorrow. I know this little girl. I feel her in my soul. She is my daughter, Lily, but I am afraid. I cannot remember a single bedtime story or the sound of my name being called by her. I don't know if I remember how to be mom. She felt a deep, empty ache where those years of memory should have been. You don't need to remember the name, Ethan replied, his heart aching, yet full of overwhelming joy. He looked at Lily, who was tentatively holding her mother's hand. She is still going to call you Mom, and we will teach you every memory, Anna. We'll make new ones. Over the next few days, Ethan stayed by her bedside, holding her hand, gently filling in the blanks of their life together. The day they met, their wedding day, the birth of Lily. She began to recount her dreams, connecting them to his vigil. I kept seeing you every evening, the man with the tea, the man who brought the blanket. I thought it was a recurring dream of salvation. That wasn't a dream, he murmured, kissing her forehead. That was me. That was real. It was our truth. Then one quiet morning, as the first rays of sunlight streamed into the sterile room, Anna opened her eyes. The confusion was gone, replaced by crystalline, heartbreaking recognition. A genuine, luminous smile broke across her face, the smile he remembered from before the crash, filled with mischievous light. She squeezed his hand, her voice a strong, clear bell. Ethan, she said, I remember everything now. I remember our first apartment, the silly arguments, the love. I remember running away that night. I am your wife. He buried his face in her shoulder, letting 3 years of withheld pain and grief flood out in gasping sobs. The ghost was gone. He was no longer a single father to a memory. He was a man reunited with his soulmate. The lead physician wrote in the patient's record, rarely does memory return purely through emotion, but in this case, the sustained, quiet devotion of the husband was the catalyst. The constant presence of the partner, acting as an anchor, helped the patient's brain reestablish neural pathways. The connection of the heart superseded the trauma of the brain. The moment he held her hand, the patient's fragmented memory fully consolidated, confirming the identity of Anna Cole. Anna's physical recovery was swift, but the emotional journey back to her old life was daunting. The hospital discharged her, and Ethan drove her home, a modest house, quiet and filled with Lily's art and the echoes of their past. He had carefully preserved everything, down to her favorite reading chair and the old wedding photo on the mantelpiece, covered in a fine layer of dust. She walked through the house, her fingers trailing over familiar objects, tears tracking paths through the dust. The scent of their old home, a mixture of old books and Ethan's aftershave, hit her like a physical blow. She paused at the kitchen counter, touching a small scratch they had both made, trying to install a shelf years ago. You kept it all, she whispered, touching the refrigerator where Lily's magnet still spelled out I Heart's mom. You didn't move on, Ethan. I didn't know how to live any other way, he confessed, standing behind her, his hands hovering, afraid to touch her for fear she might vanish. I didn't know how to stop being your husband, even to a memory. She turned to him, her eyes still holding a lingering shadow of fear. Ethan, I'm afraid I'm not the same woman you married. 3 years as Jane Doe changes you. I'm harder now. I'm afraid to be soft. He took her hands, bringing them to his lips. I'm not the same man either. I was hardened by grief, then softened by the necessary act of quiet kindness. but we are still us. Maybe we are better, stronger versions, forged by what we endured alone. That evening, they cooked their first meal together in 3 years. A simple pasta dish, messy and loud, with Lily giggling in the middle as Anna tried and failed to remember where the strainer was kept. It was a perfect, chaotic return to normalcy. During dessert, Lily looked at Anna, her little face serious, her hand resting trustingly on her mother's knee. "Mommy," she asked, "are you going to stay forever and ever?" Anna leaned down, kissing her daughter's forehead. "If you and your father still need me," she promised, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm not going anywhere. This time, I'm home for good." Later, under the soft glow of the porch light, Ethan and Anna sat side by side, their hands intertwined. The silence was comfortable, the air smelling of pine and night-blooming jasmine. "I spent 3 years learning to be resilient without you," Ethan admitted, looking at the distant stars. "I learned that kindness is the only thing that fills the void. Now all I want to learn is how to live with you again. No more shadows, just light." Anna rested her head on his shoulder, a profound sense of peace settling over her. "So we start over," she whispered, her fingers tracing the veins on his hand. "Like two strangers who just found love and who are determined not to lose it this time. Our history is a kindness story." They chose to build a new life based not on the trauma of the past, but on the enduring, quiet compassion that had saved them both. They were no longer defined by the car crash. They were defined by the man who kept bringing tea in the rain. "From this day forward, I choose to look at each other for one beat longer. I will live kindly." 6 months later, Ethan and Anna stood side by side, holding hands as they admired their new venture. They had opened a small, sunlit cafe in the bustling heart of their quiet neighborhood, built on the principles of warmth and community. They named it Second Memory. They chose the location, deliberately, just blocks from the corner where they had been reunited as strangers. Inside, the walls were adorned with simple, framed photographs, one of the rainy street corner where they met and a new picture of the three of them, father, mother, and daughter, standing under a sunset glow, all smiling, all fully present. A handcrafted wooden sign hung above the counter, etched with a single profound truth. Sometimes love remembers when memory forgets. One afternoon, a regular customer, a kind elderly woman, pointed to the sign. "Why that name, dear?" "Second Memory." Ethan smiled, wiping down the counter. "Because my wife lost her memory," he explained simply. "But for 6 months, I kept showing up to help her, even though I thought she was a stranger. I realized that my love, the real, true feeling, hadn't forgotten her. It was the memory that failed, not the love. So this cafe is built on our second chance, our second memory of finding each other." Anna, now effortlessly pulling a perfect espresso shot, smiled back, looking radiant and completely whole. Lily sat in the corner, practicing a simple melody on a small upright piano, her laughter weaving through the gentle hum of conversation. The atmosphere was one of profound, quiet gratitude. As the sun began to set and the last customers filed out, Anna walked over to Ethan. She placed her hands flat against his chest, feeling the steady, familiar rhythm of his heart, the rhythm that had kept her alive, even when she didn't know why. "Ethan," she asked, her voice turning serious, "if I were to forget again, what would you do?" He chuckled, pulling her close, resting his chin on her hair. "I would stop the truck, bring a blanket, buy the hot tea, and help the lonely woman on the street again," he promised. "I would do it every single day until you remembered who I was. And even if you never remembered, I would still come." She hugged him tightly, breathing in the scent of coffee and love, sealing the promise. "Then I don't need to worry about remembering," she murmured into his shirt, "because you taught me how to believe in kindness over everything else." Their story, once a tragedy, had become a testament to the enduring power of compassion, a silent 6-month commitment made to a stranger that was, in truth, a faithful promise to a ghost. The love that had been lost and declared dead was simply waiting to be found again, hidden in the gentle rhythm of a nightly offering. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe NL Touching Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten.